Welcome to Zero to Start Spotlight, a podcast about VR development that brings you inspiring conversations with immersive creators and industry leaders, brought to you by Oculus from Facebook. I'm your host, Ceciliana Trevino, co-founder of AR/VR Women and Allies, the online immersive art, tech, and design community dedicated to increasing representation in spatial computing. Connect, share, and grow with us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and arvrwomen.com. Stepping into the spotlight for our first episode is Allison Lee, Develop Program Manager at Oculus, who will share how art and architecture influence VR design. She takes us through the ins and outs of Oculus Launch Pad, the prestigious Facebook program she leads that's designed to support promising VR content creators from diverse backgrounds with hands-on training and support so they can iterate on their unique ideas and bring them to market. Now in its fifth year, Oculus Launch Pad 2020 applications are open until August 20th. You'll also hear Allison share her tips for beginner VR creators and what it takes to stay ahead in a future-forward industry that's always changing. Welcome to Zero to Start, Allison. It's great to have you on as a guest today.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Before we dive into learning more about Launchpad, tell us about your first aha moments in VR.
My first moments with VR were with modern VR in the last about 7 years now it's been. My first experience in a headset, in a 6DoF headset, was with the DK1 back at, I believe it was 2011 PAX in Seattle, where I actually jumped into Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes. I think that was one of our earliest experiences that were launched on the headsets, and some of our early developers were working on that. And it's continued to be a great application to showcase 6DoF interactions and then also an asymmetrical gameplay. And I think that's what drew me in for the first time, was the asymmetrical gameplay, because I had been familiar with VR before, just kind of on the periphery. It was always talked about in friend groups. It was slightly part of my job at the time where folks were talking about it as a new technology, but I never really jumped into a headset or saw the appeal of it outside of a headset until that long line outside of Indie Mega Booth during that conference. I believe it wrapped around 50 people strong because it was one of the only headsets on the show floor. And I saw how insanely engaging it was and how you could lose yourself in just trying to solve a puzzle and working together. It was much more interactive and fun and collaborative than I expected it to be. After that, I just started sharing my experience with this new thing on my head. It felt like a giant toaster. I always described it as a toaster because it's about that size. And my roommate at the time jumped me into Tilt Brush because I have a background in art. And so I always look for new technologies to expand artistic expression. And they threw me into Tilt Brush and told me just to start painting. I spent hours and hours just playing around with new brushes, colors. And this was super early in the days of Tilt Brush and the days of VR. So it wasn't as robust of a palette that you could play around with. Because it's all around you, it just blows your mind in a way that you never can really conceive of until you actually get into the headset.
The magic of using a tool that produces an effect that you know doesn't exist in the real world. And when you talk about how art can be a reflection of the artist, you get to see yourself in a new way.
Exactly. And also in VR, we always talk about, especially in the art mediums, the viewer's gaze and how that affects how your art is interpreted. A lot of times in 2D mediums, you have a little bit more control of where the viewer is looking and what areas that you want to focus on, and the perspective, the distance from the piece, different areas are at play, and you as the artist have control over it. In VR, you relinquish control over to the user. And so it has a whole new approach to how you're creating items, because they have to be kind of like very, very early game development where it was so expensive to put in different pieces to a level. Everything in the level had a purpose. With VR art, because you can't control the user and where they go, how they interact, what they want to touch, where they're looking, who they're talking to, everything in there needs to have some sort of purpose or connection or meaning and really drive home that overall message you're trying to get across with your piece in a way that 2D doesn't really lend itself to.
It really expands the role from being an artist or being a storyteller into truly a world builder.
Definitely, or because it's so fantastical, I would say dream builder.
VR captivates different audiences across the spectrum of experiences, from games, art, education, and beyond.
Definitely. So on my personal side, I'm a gamer and an artist, and then I'm also a autoimmune patient. My experience with VR has spanned all of these different areas of my life. I've also worked with different companies to drive empathy through VR experiences and use different technologies to relate back to patients. And I think that is also on the training and education side super important to be able to do, and something, again, I keep saying this phrase, unique to VR that we haven't had experience in with any other medium.
The multidisciplinary aspects of VR continue to drive curiosity and creative exploration. You really get a front row seat to watching that develop in your role as the manager for Oculus Launch Pad.
We are coming up on our 5th year, so it's 5 years of Launch Pad, and we've seen over 500 developers come through the program so far, really taking advantage of all we have to offer and going on to launch in all of our hardware platforms from Go all the way up to Quest. Launchpad is our annual developer program focused on supporting underrepresented communities in the VR industry. Our goal is to break down as many barriers to entry as possible for these developers as they start creating their passion projects. We want to provide access, funding, and education to these developers as they go through our program so they can focus on creating their applications and getting exposure, experience, and building out their networks within the industry. So it's really about building that representation for these communities. We set it up so that we have really 3 sections for the program for developers to go through. And it starts with boot camp, which is traditionally a 2-day hands-on experience for all of the new program members to come together, meet each other, build that community together, and start learning from Oculus about what it takes to develop for the Oculus platform, what it means to be a diverse representative within the VR industry, and talk about some new technologies with industry leads. And then from there, we invite you to develop your Launchpad project through a support period where we offer digital support. Last year, it was through weekly office hours where you can get access to our developer support engineering team, where they can troubleshoot your issues, talk through next steps with you, and give you more hands-on feedback as you're developing a project. And then you mentioned Demo Day, which was completely new for the program last year, where you get a chance to showcase what you've worked on, talk about next steps for your project, and then learn some next steps you can take with Oculus. You get to learn about Oculus Start if you weren't already familiar with it. And we do see it as a next step after Launchpad, where you then get additional support from the Start team, which includes hardware, access to game engine development systems, also events and other sorts of one-on-one developer support. It's a really wonderful program and another next step for these members to really take advantage of.
It's good to know that there's a program like Launchpad that can help developers gain the skills, be a part of community, and really push the limits of their imagination.
That's right. The goal with the program is really I kept saying, I know it's kind of a buzzword phrase of breaking down barriers to entry, but it's us trying to take away all of that white noise of concern that comes along with the challenge of developing. So like, do I have enough money to do this? Do I have the hardware to do it? Do I know who to talk to if I have problems? Do I have the right team to actually make my idea come to life? Do I have those resources? Launchpad will provide hardware, will provide education, will give you access to our developer support team so you can ask those questions. You'll be able to network not only within the current Launchpad year, but also the larger Launchpad alumni group is amazing for supporting other members and their creations. You don't have to worry about where the hardware is coming from, or if you receive the grant at the end, it's just where that monetary support is coming from. So you can just focus on creating. That, I think, is the biggest benefit to the program.
I was fortunate to participate in Launchpad 2019, where I was really able to push my creative and technical limits, in addition to being a part of a group of dedicated immersive creators, all revved up about building applications for the next wave of computing. What can you tell us about Oculus Launchpad 2020?
The Launchpad 2020 program is happening this year. I think everybody was concerned that with COVID and all the things going on that we might not have a Launchpad program. We are launching a 100% digital boot camp later this year in September, and we're super excited to have a digital experience that as closely as possible mirrors that in-person experience that we've had in the past. Applications will be accepted through August 20th. 2020, and you can find that on developer.oculus.com/launchpad.
Apply today, don't delay. How do you decide how many people to accept?
We are sticking to the 100 developer member acceptance again this year to make sure that with each session that we have available, that everybody can get to know the other developers in the program year. We want to make sure that it's as intimate of an experience as possible and that each member that has access to this program gets a really concrete benefit out of the experience that they have.
And can people who have participated in previous Launchpads, can they reapply?
You can reapply. There is just a big note that your previous experience with Launchpad won't factor into this year's acceptance. We want to give everybody as equal a playing field as possible. So each application to the program is treated as a fresh applicant. That you're a new developer to us, and we're looking at the work that you're submitting through this application with new eyes.
How can beginners start putting together their application to Launchpad? Do you have any tips or things that we should be mindful of as we apply?
The application is very open for developers to showcase who they are, where they come from, and what they want to say through VR. We don't have any sort of prescriptive checklist of, yes, you need to have X amount of experience or be making X VR application for you to get in. That's not the point of Launchpad. The point of Launchpad is to open you up to pursue whatever you're passionate about and whatever your vision is for VR. So the application itself, we look for creators that show that they can make something. We do like to see if you have experience creating a world. Maybe it's 3D art, you've created a digital space, so that we know that you'll understand the technical portions of the program, so that if you go into a Unity course, we can make sure that you're understanding the base 101 items. Launchpad, I consider 102. If you have opened Unity, that's kind of the base level of understanding we're looking for. And then we want to hear about where you come from and what you're bringing to the table. So make sure you have that way of expressing yourself. We have open-ended essay questions where we'd like to hear more from you. Tell us about who you are, what you want to say, and how you plan to create it in VR. Thinking about how you're going to use the technology to really bring that to life, I think is a really great way to prep for applying.
If you've applied to Launchpad and have not been accepted in the past, it's encouraged to continue to reapply.
That's correct. If you've applied to Launchpad in the past and you haven't been accepted for previous years, please reapply. We want to continue hearing from you and see the progress that you've made.
If I've applied with an idea that I've been working on and it was passed over 1 year, would I reapply with that same idea, or should I think about a new idea? Is that a question that you get a lot?
It is. I think the big thing to remember is that we look at a lot of different factors when it comes to the application. It's not just the concept that you're submitting or your VR background and development experience. It's everything combined. You have a couple of different sections of the Launchpad application where we ask you about yourself and your background in creating 3D worlds, where we want to see your technical background, what you are bringing to the table, whether that's a certification you have, you've been developing for X amount of years, or you went through our Unity Learn course, whatever it may be. We have that section. We want to see what you have done on the technical side. And then we want to hear about you as a person and your perspective you're bringing to VR and what you want to create, so we can understand why VR is important to you and the message you're trying to bring to the platform. We're focused on supporting underrepresented communities. So that is definitely priority one for this program, is to make sure those communities have direct access. And then we look at the different areas in which they identify in their application in conjunction with all these different fields combined that really make up the full decision rather than just one point. While we want to know what you're looking to make and we want to champion that, it's not going to be restricted in any way. We are just looking at the full applications as a whole and also in context with the larger application pool and who we have to choose from.
Well, I don't envy the work that you have to do in order to make those decisions because I know it can be really challenging. Although I will say that the process of applying is also a really good opportunity in and of itself for VR creators to establish their point of view and refine their proposals.
Definitely. And we hammered home last year for the 2019 program the importance of a 6-minute elevator pitch and also through the vertical slice development, how to refine what you're showing to somebody in a short amount of time. We ask all members of the program to create a short vertical slice to both even the playing field for all different developers that have access to the program. So we have a range of developers that join Launchpad. They can be students and hobbyists, the folks that are just trying out VR for the first time. And we also have some folks that might be full-time developers and have been doing this for years. And so for the vertical slice development, we wanted to even that playing field out as much as possible. So the developers that might be coming in with a previously created experience, they have to shorten that experience down to just a couple minutes of gameplay that showcase the highlights of their application and what they're trying to say. And then for the new folks that are just maybe making their first VR experience, they only have to make a couple of minutes of gameplay and they're not daunted with the task of making a full-fledged experience in a few months because that's impossible. So you're all in it together and you're all experiencing that same development challenge. But then also you might only get a couple of minutes to have somebody in a headset. I always made fun of the term elevator pitch, but I've actually been caught in elevators and had to pitch different things to people just between a couple of floors. And so you only sometimes have 2 minutes, 3 minutes to really make sure the person you're speaking to understands who you are and what you're trying to say. So making sure you understand the core to what you're creating and your message is so, so key.
In the process of submitting your vertical slice at the end of the program for the scholarship enhanced the Launchpad experience for me. I found it to be one of the most compelling educational experiences that I've had so far with VR. It accelerated my development skills, and you really get a rigorous introduction into how, as a game studio, you would be submitting your project to the store. And I found that really invaluable.
Yep. And I tried to be I know it was really infuriating sometimes, but I tried to be as hands off with that section as possible so that you got the experience of what it would be like without Oculus support there.
That was on purpose.
That was on purpose.
That was on purpose.
I did sit in our group chats and I watched all of the complaints and I tried to be there on hand if I needed to jump in and help you through it. I find it really valuable when I go through the stumbles and then I try and figure out and piece things together and then use that direct resource as a last resort rather than the first step, because you're not always going to have me or have the regular developer support on call. So I wanted to encourage folks to really try and troubleshoot on their own, especially using something that's very proprietary to Oculus. One, it helps us learn how our developers are actually using our systems rather than having our intervention in there, how you're actually going to experience it without us hand holding it. And then also it gives you that back end experience yourself to remember it and understand different areas where you need to go, different caveats you need to make, maybe shortening different link names, whatever it might be. You will more likely than not remember it more by figuring it out on your own.
Last year, I was working as a solo dev during Launchpad, and a week before the deadline, made sure that the file worked on the release channel. And I'm so glad I did that, because just as the final countdown to the deadline hits, the chat on Discord is a flood of questions and excitement, and getting your project onto the release channel is not something you really want to be worrying about 10 minutes before the deadline.
Yeah. And I will say that I was still there working with some of the Launchpad members through to midnight that night for submissions, just confirming I received things, making sure that it wasn't a technical issue on our end, that we didn't receive their application. And then some folks, even I had a backup file for them in case they were running into issues. So we try and make it as accommodating as possible, understanding that our platform specific tools can be challenging and also have a learning curve that can be a little steep.
Is there anything else around Launchpad that you consistently get in terms of questions or concerns that people have as they either approach and apply to the program or when they're in the program?
I think the biggest thing that I always receive is the question of what you're looking for. I just want to reiterate that I don't have a checklist of items of the type of developer or the type of content that we want to admit, because VR is moving so quickly and rapidly. We have so many different developers with different ideas that come from different places that are going to express themselves in a way that I can't even anticipate. And I want Launchpad, and Launchpad is set up to be this, a place for you to express that in as broad a stroke as possible. Be weird. I want to see your weird. There's no checklist of items that you need to do to get accepted into the program or receive the grant at the end. We keep ourselves as open-minded as possible to see and experience all of the different crazy things that you can come up with. I think people are surprised to know or see the range of experiences that we've supported. We have game developers, we have narrative storytellers, 360 videos, educational applications, enterprise applications, folks that are pursuing subscription models. Of all these different types of apps have been receiving of Launchpad support, which is exactly what we want. We want to be representative of the full community, the full platform, and everything you can do in VR.
And where will these experiences go after they receive the scholarship funding? Is that an automatic onto the Oculus store, or do they receive additional support outside of the funding?
The funding is just the start. Once you receive the grant at the end of the Launchpad year program, we work with you to create progress against the application you submitted. So we have some one-on-one support that you'll receive towards your specific app goals, whether that's going towards launch or some other goal that you might have in mind. I have a few applications here from last year that are looking to receive more QA against their application, and they're not quite ready to launch yet. They are also looking for some advice on some narrative storylines that they're looking to add in. So we're working with these developers on those specific goals. It really comes down to what works within your development process at the time. And for the next year, we work with you to flesh those out.
What are some of those expectations that people should anticipate encountering or dealing with when they're trying to make something for the first time?
The biggest thing we see from developers that might be a misstep that they don't think about when they're starting to create is really the amount of time that it would take to tackle certain aspects or complete their project, especially when you're super early and you haven't gone through this process before. You might think that maybe your level will take 2 months to develop, and that might be the case with a full team of 10 and also having a full-time workload associated with that and not having to worry about life on the outside and taking those timing factors into consideration.
Like a perfect world.
Yeah, the perfect world doesn't ever happen. Making sure, I think, right at the outset that you detail out your timeline and resources and be realistic about it. Maybe you're working are willing to work 20 hours a week on your project, which would be amazing to dedicate to if you're not a full-time game developer or VR developer. Just try and figure out each month how much time you have to dedicate to the project, how many people you would need to reach out to and lean on. So if you're going to outsource art, if you're going to outsource sound design, what that looks like, what their timing looks like, and also the communication with a team that might not be right next to you in an office, how much time you'll need to bake into that, just to make sure that you're setting yourself up for a realistic year or 2 years or whatever your time period is that you're working on this project.
Thank you so much for all that insight. Launchpad is open to residents in the US and Canada. The deadline is August 20th, so mark your calendars and be sure to apply.
Find the application on developer.oculus.com/launchpad. It has an overview of what Launchpad is, as well as some timelines to keep in mind as far as application receipts and when boot camp happens, what happens after boot camp. All of that is on that page, including our review criteria, our terms and conditions, all of that technical stuff is all linked on that site. If you're from an international country outside of North America, please email me at launchpad@oculus.com and tell me about what you're working on. Tell me about what you're looking for in terms of support from Oculus, and we'll find ways where we can support you.
Fantastic. You heard it here on Zero to Start. Oculus has partnered with Unity on a course that's available online. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. The program is called Design, Develop, and Deploy for VR. You can find it on learn.unity.com. It's also on developer.oculus.com/UnityLearnVR. And it's a 12-module video series where you'll learn from both Oculus and Unity, from designing best practices and talking through different principles of VR like locomotion, hand presence, all the way through optimizing your application, testing it, and an actual go-to-market strategy. So once you're complete with the application, you'll learn what it takes to launch. And after you're completely done with testing, what that means. It's a really great starter course for folks trying to dive in.
The first couple of chapters do an excellent job of illustrating the landscape and breaking down the production components of making a VR experience. Maybe I'm not necessarily going to build the project. There's great resources that will help you understand how to get started and what some of the expectations are around the labor, the time commitment.
And the great thing about this course, too, to tack on to that was actually a really great overview there, is that it's a free course. So you can jump right in now. There's no heavy lifting there. Also, because they're pre-recorded videos, you can jump back to different modules and re-listen, share those out, make sure you understand each section and go at your own pace. So there's no rushing through anything, and you can always travel back to module 1, 2, or 3 once you've finished the program. And if you're like me, I go at a very slow pace when I'm learning these things. So I like being able to stop and start and come back to it and replay upon replay to make sure I really understand what's going on.
I'm definitely right there on the replay. And I'm just like, wait, what did he say?
Yeah, say that again. Wait, let me Google that. I swear those are words. Okay.
And it's exciting too when you see something work for the first time.
My first VR experience that I ever made was the Unity rollerball tutorial.
What?
Yeah.
So I'll hear it for the rollerball tutorial.
Whoop, whoop. It was so basic. You look at it at the first video that it shows you, because it shows you the end product. You're like, I can do that. That seems so simple. You're just rolling a ball in this little tray, and then you start walking through it and you're like, oh God, there's so many things I need to consider, like gravity and perspective. It's just so many different things that you never really considered if you haven't touched VR development before. It's a really great starter tutorial to go through, but it took me, I think, like 2 weeks to do. I dedicated about 1 to 2 hours a day to try and teach myself how to do this. And this was also the first time I had ever opened up Unity. So I was also teaching myself Unity and Unity VR. And so it was a lot of
It's a steep curve.
combined. Yes,
on
it
top.
is.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a beginner out there and you aren't familiar with game engines or building 2D games, be prepared, be patient, be persistent. It is not something that you can necessarily just intuitively pick up. It does take time. And I think for developing, sometimes you really need those long stretches of time that can be difficult to come by.
Mm-hmm. But it's also, the time is worth it. So building these fundamentals, and the Learn course that we had developed really hammers in all of the VR fundamentals that you'd need to make an application. Having these underneath your belt, again, opens you up to be able to play around. And once you don't have to figure out where that menu item is and how to implement any sort of movement, you can then try and push what movement is. How are people moving around? How are people looking around? What can they interact with? So the basics and those fundamentals are super, super key.
They open the door to the possibilities.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like art. I actually just got introduced to the idea of practicing drawing before your final finished piece that you attempt, doing a warm up before you attempt the finished piece. And it's, I think, the same for any sort of digital output, particularly for VR, where I see it as a cross section between all these different fields and combining art and technology and education and immersion, all these different things. Having basic fundamental training warm-ups to go through to make sure that you're in the space and know the different sections to build upon. I think it's a fun step up and starting point for everybody, and the base building blocks for every application.
When you were describing getting accustomed to the interface of Unity and understanding the workflow and how everything fits together, it reminded me of trying to learn an instrument. You struggle through those sour notes every day until you develop a fluency. And then that allows you to really start to create the kinds of worlds that you envision without as much friction in learning the fundamentals. But it's also, I think, important to manage the expectation around certainty in this space, because things develop quickly and they can go away just as quickly.
We move extremely fast in this field, and I think keeping up it's been a challenge for me, and it's probably been a challenge for more people in the industry, just to make sure that we know what's coming next and think 2 steps ahead of where the technology is going to end up, just because it's so new and there's so many people working on it right now, so many different companies that are investing in it, that everything's changing at a rapid pace.
Hold on tight. Beyond learning how to build experiences with leading game engines like Unreal or Unity, what other fields or tools should beginners explore as they prepare for a career in VR?
As far as some base level skills to make sure you have under your belt, it would be around business development and understanding what you're creating and how that relates back to your business, finances, those logistics there, so that you're set up for success after you launch. The development portion of it is the fun part. It's the place where you get to be creative, where you get to see your visions come to life. What nobody wants to deal with is all of the bureaucracy, the operations side of things, how to onboard new people to your team, what do tax forms look like, those things. But they're super important to understand and be able to manage, especially as you grow, just so that you don't have to worry about it later. You're not stressed out about it. It doesn't hit you as a surprise the next year when you're doing your taxes and you're like, oh, I'm a freelancer doing this development thing, and then I have to track my receipt. What can oh God.
Get ahead of the details around the accounting and...
Exactly. So having that business background to just base level, understand what you're getting into, how to structure things, I think that's super important to help you manage your overall development. As far as unexpected areas to explore when you're trying to create an experience, I actually think diving into architecture and spatial planning is a field that a lot of people don't think of when they think of VR and technology, but they really go hand in hand, because you are, as we said earlier, building a world. You're creating a space for people to experience all things around them 360. And architecture, that field, takes into account building space and how it relates to the person that is experiencing that space. And architectural principles in the past have also talked about how different artistic flourishes, so like the use of columns, the use of different window treatments, all these different aspects of architecture are also communicating culture and feeling and empathy and these ideas within the structure itself. And that type of conceptualization I think pulls directly through to VR and what you're trying to create. One of my friends, she's an architect and an amazing developer and gamer and artist. Sarah Bonzer just released a book called Virtual Vernacular, which goes through different pieces of architectural theory and how it applies to virtual experiences. And it's a great starting point to understand how you can apply architecture to VR.
We'll be sure to include a link to Virtual Vernacular in the show notes. COVID really caught everyone by surprise. In addition to all of the negative impacts, it has changed the way people are working and learning overnight. Can you talk about how this moment is made for VR, that impression from being inside of Oculus?
We've definitely seen that on our end as well. And we see it as an opportunity to make improvements to the platform and really make sure that the use cases that we're seeing meet what we're providing. So I think in the past, we've treated remote work and this of reaching people at any distance as a nice to have, as something that we could use as a supplement to in-person meetings and experiences. But now everything is digital, everything is distanced. And so we need to make sure that not only this virtual experience where you're sitting at a conference as an avatar is great for an hour, it needs to feel good for 8 hours a day, working 5 days a week. So it's definitely seen a lot of drive internally to make sure that our products are meeting our customers' needs and that our developers also have on their end all of the systems in place to make sure they can continue creating and meeting the needs of their audiences as we are.
Do you have a quarantine playlist?
I have a couple of quarantine playlists. My go-to artist lately has been Donny Benet. He is a funk bass guitarist, and he has some really fun party bop style, I'm working on this project and can kind of groove to it kind of music. And it's super fun to listen to and always puts a smile on my face when I have him in the background.
Is that on Spotify, or how are you playing your music these days?
It's a mix of Spotify and YouTube. So I love
Nice.
his music videos. He makes it on his own. So it's always fun to see what he makes himself. And it's usually just him starring in his music video as all of the characters. So it's always funny to watch a little bit. But he is on Spotify and also Google Play.
We'll have the link to the YouTube channel in the show notes.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any final words of wisdom for listeners who want to dive into VR and are just trying to sort out how to get started?
Some final words of wisdom. So if you're just starting out, don't expect to be crazy good right out the bat. We all start off stumbling and falling flat on our face a little bit. We have a big learning curve when it comes to these technical fields and all these different applications we need to use. But we're lucky enough to be at a time when all of these learning modules are available online, usually available for free. We have the Unity course. We have this podcast here that's an amazing resource. We have a lot of other digital learning opportunities like on YouTube videos. You have networks that you can take advantage of on Facebook groups, in Discord, in different forum chats. There's so many ways where you can access and learn right now for free and do it at your own pace. It might be intimidating. There's might be a lot to digest, like drinking from a fire hose, but you can do it. And there are a lot of tools available for you to get it done.
Well said. And start with Rollerball.
Yes.
That's an old version of Unity, right? I mean, that's a pretty old.
It was so weird too, because I was trying to, the video tutorial of it was using an old version of Unity. So I had to try and map the Unity menus to the new version that I was using.
No.
So you'll run into these little quirks, but we've all been there and we can all commiserate the challenges that you're seeing and how you just wish you had what was in your head on the computer and live. You just tried so hard. We've all been there.
Press play. Just press play.
Yes.
Just work. Just work.
Yeah.
And that's why I started the podcast, because I'm just like, why doesn't this just work?
Mm-hmm. I have so many file names that it just say, just work, just play, damn it. That's the name of the file.
I know those project files well. definitely go for the rollerball tutorial. Tell us how it went. Tag us on Twitter. I'm at iSiciliana. How can we keep up with you, Allison, on social media if you even have time to be there?
I am also on Twitter. I'm not on Twitter as often as I would like to be lately. I think mainly because of getting Launchpad 2020 really off the ground right now. But I'm at AV Lee, Lee _ at the end. So you can find me on Twitter there and tweet at me, add to my account. I don't have many followers. I don't know.
Go follow Allison Lee on Twitter and share your exhilarating moments of learning rollerball.
Mm-hmm.
It would be so cool if there was a subculture of rollerball enthusiasts.
Ooh. Again, it looks so simple, but then when you get into it, you realize how difficult it actually is, which makes those small moments that I always like hang on to, because you're working so hard and you figured it out. You yourself worked through all of those problems, you researched, you asked around, and then you made it happen. It's so satisfying when that happens.
Hashtag rollerball. Thanks again, Allison, for being a guest on our Spotlight series. It was such a pleasure to speak with you at this detail on Oculus Launch Pad 2020.
It was really great speaking with you as well, and I'm so excited to see what the new Launchpad year brings.
Thanks for joining us today on the Zero to Start Spotlight, brought to you by Oculus from Facebook. You can support Zero to Start by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. Give us a rating and share this episode with people who want to learn more about breaking into VR. Until next time, happy installing.